Okay guys, we're starting the progressive era. So this is my first time actually recording a PowerPoint in this way. So just try to bear with me, and thanks for taking the time to look at this. Today we're going to look at the objectives. Can reform movements improve American society and politics? So we want to describe, we want to list the different problems in society that the new time period or the progressive era attempts to address. We want to describe the reforms enacted during this time period at various levels, including local, state, and national. We want to describe and identify the works of various muckrakers during this time period. And then, of course, talk about the achievements of the presidential progressives, which include, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. And then, really, what is the legacy of the progressive movement? So here we go. Here, various pictures right there, especially. So we have the jungle with Upton Sinclair, or as I like to call him, Upchuck Sinclair, but we'll save that for another slide. So, big questions that we want to look at. How successful were the progressive reforms with respect to industrial conditions, urban life, and politics? Then we want to evaluate the effectiveness, analyze the limitations. Why did the progressive era end at a specific point in time? What else is happening in the world that takes our attention away from reform and into other issues? So, the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the progressive movement. We got little T-Row watching over this the entire time. So we have between 1890 and 1920. So these years are going to be very important in looking at the concept and the context of this time period. We have the populist movement is starting to gain momentum and kind of falls flat in 1892. And then by 1920, we've just gotten out of World War I. We're still discussing how to negotiate and if we should approve that Treaty of Versailles. So this is about a 30-year time period where a lot of stuff happens, and it happens very quickly. So, the progressive movement was a reform movement. We've talked about reform movements within society before. Think of the antebellum movement prior to the Civil War, the idea of the temperance movement, trying to end alcohol abuse, obviously the abolitionist movement, and then, of course, pushing for suffrage, changes for Native Americans after the Civil War. So these are various reform movements. They're nothing new to American history, and there's a constant. Reform is a constant within our American, ideology. So by 1900, we're rich, we're powerful, and we've transformed into a major world economy. So this is big time for us. We're kind of setting the stage for what's going to be referred to as by other historians as America's century. The 20th century is America's time. So we have changes in life. We know the positives and the negatives of the Industrial Revolution. Because people were making so much money during this time period, it was the idea that the workers who helped establish the Industrial Revolution should be getting a piece of the pie. Unfortunately, they didn't. So as the rich are getting richer, the poor or the working class are saying, when is it my time? And this is where we start to see the push for reform. It's not about greed, but it's about better conditions, what unions push for, and it's about, this identity. We have an American identity, a standard of living, and people are trying to obtain it. So who were they? They're not a single group, and that's a big issue. They're you've got your farmers, you've got your populists, you've got your immigrants, you've got people who are pushing for suffrage, you've got civil rights, you've got religion. So they're kind of a hodgepodge or a patchwork of different reform movements kind of becoming umbrellaed under the progressive movement. So, city dwellers. That's just self-explanatory. People who are living within these tenements, who are slaving away in the factories, educated professionals who are witnessing this. So that would include doctors, lawyers, social workers, clergy, and teachers. Because remember, as these are the individuals who are meeting with the immigrants kind of as a first line and seeing what they're going through and pushing and wanting to push for change. And then, as discussed before, you have the muckrakers. As media becomes bigger and bigger, the advent of later on what we'll see, of course, with radio and TV, but the literary magazines, newspapers, various types of journals are going to play a huge role in getting the progressive message out there. Similar to that of what we see with social media today. Think about if these muckrakers had Instagram. Like if a Jacob Riis had Instagram, how would his pictures be, how would they be viewed? Or if, Upton Sinclair had a blog, had a food blog, it would probably be gross and, you'd become a vegetarian. But think Food Inc. These are the same concepts. And all of these people are using this new media to help bring about reform movements. And as I said before, they're investigating, they're looking at corruption, and they're looking at the injustices that are happening. And then some of them are writing even novels that dramatize the situations, but still get the message across with maybe a more of an artistic license to it. Right up here, you can click on this and it will bring you to a tiny URL. But we have issues with muckrakers. We have muckrakers in the 1890s and, of course, the early 20th century. And then we have muckrakers that start to come about as media gets bigger and bigger. And some very famous muckrakers or muckraking reporting would be Woodward and Bernstein exposing the Watergate scandal under the Nixon administration in the 70s. And then other individuals today that are viewed as muckrakers would be somebody like Michael Moore, exposing and making documentaries that expose certain, corporate America scandals within the political arena as well. So click on this and that will bring you to muckraking articles. So one of the more famous pictures or commonly used pictures throughout the AP exam, especially also as we see on the Regents, is the image here by Joseph Kepler. It appears in Puck magazine in the latter part of the 1890s, and it's entitled The Bosses of the Senate. And you guys can probably see here, let me just grab it right here. You have the People's Entrance, which says it's closed. And then, of course, you have the entrance for the monopolists. As we know, you need to remember what a monopoly is, and there was a ton of monopolies. So you have monopoly being one business or corporation that has pretty much taken over that enterprise, and it's really the only place you could get a certain good from. And you have the steel beam, the copper beam, of course, Standard Oil, iron, sugar trust, etc. As you guys can notice, they're bigger, they're big money bags, and they dwarf all these senators right here, and the senators have to look up. And then, of course, the biggest issue right here is the Senate and what it actually stands for. Now remember, when Congress was created, it was supposed to be the more powerful branch. Remember, how does the Constitution start off? It starts off with we the people. So Congress is supposed to represent the people, and the Senate, being the upper house, was the advisors. They give advice and they give consent to the president, so they have a longer term. But what we're seeing here is that the Senate, who's, has the ear, or is supposed to have the ear of the president and the executive branch, they're being bought. They're being traded in a way. They're being handled like money to a certain degree. in regards to the Senate, or excuse me, in regards to the monopoly. So this is a Senate by the monopolists and for the monopolists. And this is a take on what Lincoln's words, a government by the people and for the people. So really what Kepler is trying to showcase is that the Senate is being bankrolled or being controlled by the monopoly. So really, big business has a monopoly over the Senate, and thus the Senate's not doing its job, which is to help legislate and do what's right for the people. Right. So from this, we see various goals. So you have different people with different ideologies, but they're all kind of trying to be this pragmatic, have this pragmatic method to attaining this, because to be pragmatic, it's that, to be practical. So these practical goals that the progressives want to establish. So they believe that the abuse of power by the government and the business need to stop, and this is a given. Nobody wants to say yes, let the corruption keep going, especially if they're not benefiting from it. But the abuse of the government and businesses has taken over so much that it has become really what the U.S. has become about, and that's not the Founding Fathers' wishes, of course. That's not what anybody wants to see, and the gap between the rich and the poor has increased. They believe that the new developments in science and technology can improve, and this goes back to the idea of being practical, being pragmatic. You see, I believe it was Frederick Taylor's ideas in regards to science within the factories, using a stopwatch to, scientifically gain data to see how efficient we can be. If we can be efficient in our factories and in our daily lives, then most certainly the government can be efficient as well. Capitalism, this is where you start to see kind of a split. Some of the progressives are going to push for more socialist perspective, but many believe that capitalism was okay, however it needed to be controlled. So believed in capitalism, concerned with socialism. What you will see as we get further and further into this time period, you start to see, individuals and groups who feel that the progressive movement's not going far enough, similar to that of other reform movements. And of course, they believe politics is corrupt, which that's nothing new. And then a strong government should be able to correct the abuses and then protect the rights of the people. We are not privy to all the information. We're not, all economic theorists, or, we're not all politicians, so we don't know some of these things, and the government is established to protect those natural rights and to protect us. And right here, come brothers, you have grown so big, you cannot afford to quarrel. So the ideas of capital and labor, and then commerce, as the American economy is being kind of, squeezed, or it's a struggle between the two. Capitalists during the progressive era want to retain their power, and then labor, which this labor guy happens to look a lot like, I don't know, maybe a young Joseph Stalin, and I don't know what this guy looks like, but you get the idea. Labor is pushing more and more for control, so I threw that one in. Alright, so what helped the movement grow? Various things are going to help push it, so I'm going to put it all up there. Alright, so created within the cities, they take ideas from the populist movement. Those ideas were very popular. Sorry, I had to do that. The populists and the farmers believed in the backing of silver. They believed in some government controls in regards to nationalizing railroads, infrastructure, telecommunications. And the problem is that silver issue. Whereas the workers didn't support the silver as much, they wanted their money backed in gold, so that's where you see the split. So the progressives shift and look at the cities as where they can do the most change and they can get things happening. Telephone and telegraph help make communication faster. And then, as I stated before, the newspapers and magazines are going to spread these ideas, and the economy, and then this idea of being optimistic. So we're kind of on this cusp of a new frontier for the United States. So we're looking at ourselves and feeling that we're strong enough to where we can make this. So under the umbrella of progressivism, you have the idea of muckrakers spreading the ideas. You have suffragists. You have women such as Alice Paul, Susan B. Anthony, various other women leaders, Ida Tarbell, writing and exposing Standard Oil. You have suffragists who are attempting to spread the idea of democracy. Populists, whose ideas before, as I stated with William Jennings Bryan, populist ideas are going to be absorbed by the progressives. The temperance movement, which is a continuation of the movement that we saw back in the 1830s throughout the 1850s. So we have suffragists, who eventually will get the 19th Amendment, the temperance movement, which we're going to see with the 18th Amendment. And then these guys, the Goo-Goos, these are more of your good government guys. That's the nickname that was given to them. I didn't make it up, but whatever floats your boat. These are good government guys. These are guys who are really in it to help the people, whereas some individuals, because corruption got so bad, starting really under, you start to see it increase under Ulysses S. Grant. With the Goo-Goos, you're putting in people like Fightin' Bob Lafayette, individuals such as Roosevelt and Taft, who are trying to find that balance and really push for good legislation that's going to help the people. And then the middle class women, coupled with the suffragettes, middle class women have always been, in the thick of it for reform movements. Remember, they have the education, they have the disposable income, and they also have the time. So they are well educated, well financed, and can use, they're also media savvy. They know how to use the new social media, magazines, newspapers, etc., to get their message out there. And then, of course, labor unions, because they're fighting for better working conditions, that idea of the bread and butter unionism, better conditions, better hour, better pay. So unions fall under the progressive umbrella as well. And then, of course, civil rights. You have W.B. Du Bois, you have Booker T. Washington, you have individuals who are pushing for civil rights, because under the progressive umbrella, if we're pushing for better, a better United States, the civil rights era definitely encompasses that. And of course, civil rights not only for African Americans, for immigrants as well. The progressive era encompasses also the social gospel movement, which we see in the cities, trying to help those who are living in the slums and the tenements. But you have the development of the NAACP under the civil rights movement in the progressive era. Started with Jane Addams of the Hull House movement for immigrants, Du Bois as well, and various other groups who are pushing for rights. So it's kind of picking up where the Reconstruction era left off, with a lot of change, but it's now encompassing a lot of different people, a lot of groups. They all want change, but they're all seeking various different ways to get that. So, causes right there. You've got industrialization. You kind of have this trifecta. You have industrialization, you have urbanization, you have immigration, which I didn't put up here, but you have the political issues with industrialization, the idea of, the industrialists and the corporations gaining too much power. So with the political causes, you have a push to expand the vote. You want to decrease the political machines that we saw with urbanization, such as, Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall, and increase party and voter influence to get the caucuses, which we've heard a lot about, of course, with this election. And then you have the social aspects. You have workers' rights, assimilation of immigrants, and of course the civil rights movement, and then the economic issues. We're going to see Teddy Roosevelt's policy of the Square Deal, where you want conservation. You look at the environment differently now, and that once truly American frontier has been gobbled up, and people want to save that. You have Mirror, you have the Sierra Club, and various other organizations that are going to come out and try to help the environment. And, arguably Teddy Roosevelt is one of those guys. With that, we want to regulate business. We don't want to get rid of it. We don't want to completely have it taken over by the government. We believe in the free enterprise. We believe in private, entrepreneurs and ownership. But we don't want big business to become so much that idea, that octopus that Standard Oil was. So we need to regulate business to where it's fair, and we need to protect the consumer. We're the ones who are, we don't know. We only know what we're told, unless you're going in and doing that muckraking reporting. If somebody's going to sell you something in 1902 that says it's going to help cure baldness, people believed it, tended to believe it anyways, or wanted to try it out, and lo and behold, it's something that either makes you sick or hurts you. You need to be protected. And then, of course, reforming the banking system. This is going to be particular to Woodrow Wilson, because we've had so many of what's referred to as the panics, and we were having a panic or an economic recession every 20 years, 10 to 20 years. Wilson wants to fix that. We're going to see the creation of the Federal Reserve. All right, and then at the political level right here, I don't think I put these in your notes, but you can, these are definitely within the readings. You have the push for this political ownership by the voter, and you have the idea of the secret ballot, the notion that you don't have to tell anybody who you're voting for. It's anonymous. You have initiatives, which are the ideas that the voter comes up with a bill, takes the initiative to get it out there, and then brings it to a local, local body, local governing body. Could be a town board, could be a board of commissioners, etc. So a voter takes the initiative to create a bill. The referendum, which we actually see referendums all the time, especially for high school kids. You look at the school board, the budget, that's put out as a referendum to voters within a town. They present the bill, they present a budget, and they ask the voters for permission. Does this get passed? Does it not? Going to recall right here. If something doesn't look right, we have the power now, thanks to the progressives, to recall those elections, to recall those votes. It's happened a few times in more at the local level. It hasn't happened necessarily for a president, but 2016 has turned out to be kind of a crazy election, so we never know. It actually, I believe there was a recall for the California governor, and that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got in 2004. But you can recall a vote, and the voters can say, if the election is disputed, we can have a recall, and then another election will take place. You have the direct party primaries, where electorates or voters choose the candidates for the national level. Instead of having these political machines do it, you go and at a caucus, which happens at in various states, you go and caucus and talk to other voters and then vote for that candidate, or to be represented in the presidential election, or the direct primary, where they are put out on a ballot, and you go and vote, and therefore you choose that person to represent your party for the presidential election. And then lastly, right here, which is the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. Now, going back to that picture that we saw, the bosses of the Senate, this one's going to be important. Direct election of senators. Senators used to be chosen by the state assemblies, so the people didn't have the power to choose, to choose a representative in Congress. With the direct election of senators, you give power back to the people. They have the ability to choose their senators who, remember, give advice and consent, approving treaties, approving presidential appointments, etc. So by giving people the power, all of this leads to more democracy. And I'm going to try to put it right here. You get the point. More democracy. Maybe I shouldn't have probably typed that, but I should have typed it, whatever. There you go. So more democracy. So this is how we're living up to that idea established within the Constitution of we the people. All right? And what do these reforms have in common? All of these connect to democracy and voter reform, giving people more of a say. Now remember, we're still in the early 20th century, so yes, I didn't put the 19th Amendment up here yet because it doesn't happen until after World War I. And yes, we have issues with the 15th Amendment where African American men were given the right to vote, yet you don't exactly see them exercising it because of Jim Crow laws, literacy tests, grandfather clause, and poll taxes. So yeah, there are major issues, but these are the baby steps that we're taking to push for more rights. Okay guys, so this is the end, but not really. So stay tuned for the next lecture on your favorite and mine, Teddy Roosevelt. If you want to know more about the origins of the progressive movement, you can check out these videos by clicking the links below. You got John Green with Crash Course, which I know you guys are familiar with him. A really awesome AP teacher from South Carolina, Tom Ritchie, and he has a slew of other AP goodies, if you will, on his website, tomritchie.net. And then Mr. Kaz, J. Kaz, APUSH Explained. He has a bunch of also great videos, and they align with the APUSH textbook that we use, which is Pageant. But all of these will run you about, another 15 minutes just for the idea of the visual. If you want a little more, context for the progressive movement, you can find them with those videos right there. So thanks for bearing with me for the first recorded, McGrath production. And like I said, I'll see you next time for the lecture on Teddy Roosevelt and the square deal.